Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on.
Hell House, submitted by the Reverend T. Wheelis. This dates back some years ago when we had to move to Orange, Texas, and we had a house in Logansport, Louisiana as well. My dad got a phone call that the house in Logansport had been broken into, and so they went up there to check out what had been messed up, or stolen, or destroyed. When they arrived, they started going through things and seeing what was missing and cleaning things up. While cleaning things out of my sister's room, they found an old Ouija board that had been given to her when she was a young girl. She was in her mid-20s when this happened. It was bought by a step-aunt that gave it to her one year for her birthday. Now, my family is a very religious family, and my dad decided that he was going to get rid of it, and he had always heard that if you threw it away, these things would always return back to the owner. So he decided that he was going to burn it, as he went up to my grandmother's, his mother's house, to find the stuff to burn it with. He commenced to lay it on the ground and tried to light it with a match, and the match went out. He then went into the garage and found some charcoal lighter fluid, and he proceeded to pour that onto the box and tried to light it. Needless to say, it didn't. He used almost a whole bottle and box of matches, but nothing worked. So my dad, being a believer in prayer, began to pray, asking God for help and guidance. He walked back into the garage and found some lawnmower gas and took the lid off the box and laid the bare board on top, crossways, and filled the bottom of the box with gas and a bit on the board as well. Then he began to pray and struck a match and held it to the board. Gas usually ignites from the fumes, but he still had to hold it to the board as he prayed. And then the board began to burn in the center, not on the edge where the match was. So he and my sister backed away as the board was burning, and without warning, the fire exploded straight up into the air like 15 or 20 feet, and a loud scream came from inside the board. Louder and louder it screamed, and the fire went into the ground with a rumble. And then smoke as black as night moved with the screams and moans and moved toward my dad every direction he went. No matter where he went, the smoke came at him. He even put the wind at his back, but the darkness followed him. But then with one final scream, it was gone. The board and box were just gone as well. There was only a small bit of ashes and an indentation in the ground where the board had been. They went back to Orange, Texas, and we went to church the next day, and everything was good, or so we thought. When we got home, we walked up to the house, but none of the keys would work on any of the 4 doors that we had that we could enter the house. My dad thought that one of the doors that led to the kitchen was not in the best of shape, and maybe he could just bust in and replace it later. My dad proceeded to push on the door to gain access, and when you push on things, they tend to fall away from you. But as he pushed on the door, the window shattered out onto him, like something was being thrown out. We went inside, and my dad felt like something was on his leg, like running down his leg. So he sat on a recliner and removed his slacks that he had worn to church. Blood was pouring out of a wound on his leg that he never felt any pain from. It had bled so much you could pour some of the blood from his shoe like you were pouring a drink. He had no snag in his slacks, no blood from any glass, no meat from the wound. By the way, it was about 2 or 3 inches long and an inch wide and about an inch deep. So not just a normal cut. We bandaged him up and tried to make the best of the rest of the day. Little did we know, this was the beginning of a lifetime of hell on earth. We had no way of moving because we had rented this place from my step-grandfather because my dad's job had relocated him where they needed him. But after my father was attacked, after the Ouija board was burned, that's when all these strange things began to happen. As I mentioned, we rented from my step-grandfather, and it was a duplex. They were old naval barrack houses that he had purchased, and we had rented both sides and just made it one big home. But the weird things were happening around the house, no doubt. It was late one night, and my dad and I were in the living room sitting on the couch just watching TV. We heard clicking coming from what we thought was the wall. The couch was located next to the front door to the main entrance to the home, and it was wintertime, and all the house was closed up and sealed because of the drafts. This was an old house. We had covered the windows with plastic wrap and duct tape. There was one radiator heater that we used because of natural gas prices. The clicking was getting louder and louder, and then the front door just opened. The main lock was still locked, sticking out, not bent out, not broken, just like it was locked but not shut. But the thing is, it was a barrel lock you lift and slide to latch. My dad got up and whoosh, like this blast of cold air went right through him, but the glass outer door was still closed. He stumbled back and looked at me and was confused by what had just happened. But then he closed the door and locked it and sat back down. Then he grabbed a piece of paper and put it in the doorway of my sister's room to check for drafts. Maybe that's what it was. We sat on the couch and watched TV, and my dad said to me, "Watch the paper, it's moving." And when I turned my head to watch it, it wasn't moving. I thought my dad was messing with me and trying to spook me. So I just said, "Yeah, sure," and turned back to watching TV. But again my dad said the paper was moving. I turned to look at it again, and nothing. Then he said, "Watch it out of the corner of your eyes, and don't move your head." He was right. It was moving a lot, but when we moved our heads to look at it, it stopped. So my dad said, "Just stare at it and see what happens." When I did, the paper went absolutely insane, swinging around violently. But then it stopped and then started to spin like a top. My dad got up to see if there was a draft, and the paper stopped moving. There was no draft anywhere. And then the front door flew open again. That night, after the rest of the family got home, we went to bed, and my brother came into my room and said to leave him alone and go to sleep. I had already been sleeping and had no idea what he was talking about. He asked, "How did you get from Tim's room so fast anyway?" I said, "What are you talking about? You were just jumping on my bed when I turned over. You ran into Tim's room." Tim is a cousin that lived with us. I told him to go back to sleep. He must have been having a bad dream. And he stated, "How can it be a dream when I'm awake?" We all just went back to bed. And then I heard him run into Tim's room and flick on the light and start yelling at me and Tim. I got up, walked down the hall, and asked, "What now?" He said, "Something is jumping on my bed." We looked around, and there was nothing. So I went back to my bedroom, locked my door, and got back to bed. But as I lay there trying to sleep with my music playing, I noticed that my door began to rattle. I yelled at the door and told the guys to leave me alone. And the rattling stopped, and I just lay there some more, trying to fall asleep. But my door began to shake violently this time, and I yelled out to stop, and that's when I heard glass shattering. I got up and turned my light on to see that my full-length mirror was shattered, spiderwebbed like something or someone had punched it. Although nothing else happened that night, I didn't sleep. I told my dad about the mirror, but I never did take it down. The next day was Saturday, and my brother and cousin and I were at the house alone, and the heater went off and cooled enough so that I could sit on top of it. But that day, for some reason, I chose to lean against it, and it was making my mother's owl wind chimes ring out. They were ceramic, so it was a peaceful tone. But then suddenly we heard a loud crash in the back part of the house, and we walked to our rooms to see what it might have been. There was nothing in my room, and nothing in my cousin's room, but my brother called to us to come and see what was going on. Let me paint the picture for you. My brother made the other living room of the other side of the duplex his bedroom, and the other kitchen was storage. His room was larger than a regular bedroom, and he had a lot of figurines of eagles and trophies on top of his chest of drawers. He had placed a mirror that was for the dresser, even though the dresser no longer existed there. But the mirror took 2 people to put on the chest of drawers. And now it was across the room in a chair, face down, Not broken, just out of place, and none of the trophies or figurines had been moved from the chest in front of it. We knew that because my brother never dusted anything, and everything was indeed dusty. It was overwhelming to say the least, but we dealt with it. Dad was the only person hurt by whatever this was. Unfortunately, I was to be the next target. Not much was happening out of the norm after that, lights being turned on by themselves and stuff being moved. But on this night, I had my first encounter with sleep paralysis, and it wasn't fun. It scared me. I had fallen asleep with my lights on and had awakened in my bed, but I couldn't move. I could look around with my eyes, but not move my head. I noticed black spots floating all around the room on the bed, the walls, the ceiling, all over. And all of a sudden, my arms shot straight out to the side of the bed, being pulled lightly. My legs stiffened and placed one on top of the other. One foot was propped on top of the other, and that's when I saw a huge black shadow floating from my feet just up to my face, and it rolled down to show a skeleton-like face, laughing like I had never heard before. My head fell to the left side, and then came agonizing pain in my hands and feet. The pain was intense, and before I blacked out from the pain, my side began throbbing with such pain that I cried. It was like you came up out of water gasping for air, and I was trying to catch my breath. The pain was still there, and it was days before it went away. I told my dad what had happened, and he said, "It sounds like you were crucified." Then he said, ominously, "They are after you for some reason." We stayed in that house for about 8 or 9 years dealing with things. Then my sister moved, and my cousin moved back to his mom and dad's house. My brother graduated, and I quit school. My mom and dad and brother moved back to Louisiana to the old home place, and I stayed with friends for another year or so. As for the Hell House, my grandfather sold it to a family. The people moved out a year later and had the house burned and refused to sell the land. They wouldn't say why, but I think I know. To this day I have dreams about angels and demons, about ghosts and the Hell House. Things tend to follow me, but it doesn't scare me like it used to. My dad will not talk about it to this day, and he is in his 80s. When I ask or even mention the incidents, he just begins to pray and walks away. My sister's the same way. I have had to learn to deal with a lot from spirits, shadows, dreams, and even demons. I'm 46 as I write this, sharing it with you. I'm a preacher now, been one for about 5 years. It's funny how I can see these events play in my mind over and over, but I can barely remember my own birthday sometimes. I still have things happen that I talk to my dad about, and when I do, it feels like I'm reliving each moment as I type them on my phone. I live these things day by day. I have scars on the outside and wounds on the inside from the Hell House. Orb Encounter, submitted by Jackson. I know this isn't that scary unless you were there, but Uncle Josh is the only one I trust it with, as he doesn't judge, just reads them all. Uncle Josh note: That's true. It was last year in 2022, sometime after 1 a.m, when my wife woke up and saw that the ceiling of our bedroom was covered in pink orbs. There were hundreds of them lighting up the ceiling, covering it, and moving all around. It was then that my wife woke me, and I looked up above the window, seeing a lot of them there, even though my wife said that most of them had dissipated. Trying to comprehend what they were, and of course still half asleep, I explained them away, saying that fireflies must have gotten in somehow. But my wife reassured me that they were not fireflies, and were all pink. I watched more closely and realized she was right. I continued to watch alongside my wife until they eventually just dissipated as the others had done. The ceiling had been illuminated when they moved over it, but once they were gone, we were once again in darkness. It was the strangest thing we had ever experienced together. We had no explanation and wondered if they would return, but they never did. The next morning when we got up, I looked up pink orbs on the internet. What I found was that orbs that are pink in color are those of loved ones visiting you. but no idea if that has any validity. We still have not seen them since that night, and part of us wishes they would return. And then again, we're sometimes glad they didn't. Not exactly a terrifying encounter, but it does make you think. We have several theories, including the facing mirrors theory opening a portal. Of course, those mirrors have since been removed. Does anyone know what it was we witnessed? As we would love to know what happened that night. I had never even heard of pink orbs before that night, but I know what I saw, and my wife saw it too. It Followed Me, submitted by Genevieve P. First off, I want to tell you that I wasn't a staunch believer in ghosts and the paranormal and stuff. When this happened, it was an activity with friends to do something on a Friday night that got me involved. My friend, I'll call Jenny, was really into this stuff. Early 2000s, when Ghost Hunters was a really popular show. There was a place in our town that had ghost hunts available, and she thought it would be fun to schedule an evening at this place with some friends. It's an old building in our town with a kind of sordid past, as it once served as a courthouse and a jail. From the history that we were told, a lot of people were sentenced there and went to prison. However, in the early 1900s, some people mysteriously died after being arrested and placed in the jail area. It wasn't a really huge jail, think something like the Andy Griffith Show, but a little bit bigger. A large space in the basement with about 8 cells for people being held. The stories go that there was a lot of corruption and abuse with people who were being arrested for what I think are kind of minor infractions. Public drunkenness, vandalism, stuff like that. It also should be noted that this town was once a very teetotaler town, even before Prohibition. Very religious. And to this day there are more churches in that town than anything else. So Jenny gathered a bunch of our friends, about 8 of us in total. A mix of guys and girls. We were going to rent the place out for the night starting at 8 p.m. and ending around 2 a.m. Most of us just had flashlights, but some people had those meters and recording devices to try to capture EVPs. There was a guide there who walked us through the building and went over the rules, but he let us do our thing on our own. He would spend the evening in the office area, but every once in a while he would come out when he heard us moving around just to make sure everything was okay and to see if we needed anything. He was also interested if we caught anything on tape. Like any building that's old at night, things were pretty spooky. But again, I was just there for fun and having something to do. I'm not clairvoyant or sensitive or anything like that. I'm just an average normal woman, at the time 22, and an average normal girl. We split up into 2 groups with some people going up into an attic area for whatever reason, and another group of us went down into the jail cell area. We were going to move around throughout the evening checking things out and regrouping every hour or so to see if anyone had caught anything. One of the legends we were told was about a guy who was basically the town drunk. He had been arrested over and over again for his transgressions. But the last time he was arrested, the night before his trial, he was found dead in his cell. It looked like he hung himself, but the investigation afterward showed that someone had killed him and made it look like he hung himself. There was no proof of any wrongdoing, and read into that as much as you'd like. And I suppose that's the outcome that happens when people investigate themselves. But someone got away with murder, and this poor guy died in his cell for no real reason other than being a nuisance when he got drunk. The other story was a little weirder and a little scarier. It was about a young woman who was arrested for vagrancy. She was pregnant and didn't have any real ties to the town. It's kind of a mystery as to who she was and how she showed up there. But she also died in her cell for causes unknown. The sad part is, of course, her baby with her. Again, an internal investigation turned up nothing. A big shocker. So we sat down to do some EVPs after looking into all the cells and stuff. And while I was kind of giggling at how serious some people were taking it, I did my best to just be quiet and see what would happen. Keeping an open mind, but not thinking any of it was real. We did that for the better part of an hour before going upstairs to meet with our other friends to see if they had found anything in the attic. While we all had a snack and some water, we were playing back the recorders to see if any EVPs had been picked up. I was kind of shocked that there was some stuff, and even more weirded out that it seemed to pertain to me. There were 2 distinct EVPs that referred to me when one of my friends asked to speak to the woman who died, and also asked about her baby. An EVP on the recorder clearly said, "Looks like her," and "I'm so cold." A second EVP said, "I need help. Help me." At the time, we didn't know it was referring to anything about me. But when we switched places with the other group, we were going to hang out in the court area while they went downstairs. Everyone was kind of freaked out by the faint whispering of what sounded like a woman saying those things. We were all doing our thing again, and after about a half an hour, we heard someone down in the jail cell area yell out. It was my friend Brian. Apparently, they had been asking more questions of the woman, and instead of waiting to come back upstairs with us, they were playing back their short EVP sessions. The first EVP they heard was a woman's voice saying, "Where did she go? Bring her back." Another EVP shortly after that was a recording that said, "She can help me. Bring her back." When they played it back and heard that, they immediately started asking more questions, and the faint voice was picked up saying, "Genevieve." That one was loud and clear, not as faint and wispy as the others. It was in response to a question about, "Bring who back?" They ran upstairs and played us back the recordings and told us what they'd been doing. I, of course, was now a little more than weirded out. There was only one female down in the jail cell with him, and it was not her on the voice recording. Everyone was looking at me, and I was looking at everyone else. As much as I said I didn't believe any of this stuff, you better believe I was very uncomfortable. Everyone wanted me to go back down there, and for all my silliness and bravado starting off the night, I now was really not wanting to go back there. But everyone convinced me, including the guide who came out to see what all the hubbub was. When they played the recordings back for him, he immediately asked who Genevieve was, and everyone pointed to me. I asked him if things like this had ever happened before, and he said that a voice of a female had been recorded a lot, but he'd never heard anyone's name been uttered by the voice. After a bunch of prompting, I agreed to go back down there, and I won't lie, at that point I was pretty scared. I said I wasn't going to say anything, and Brian, Jenny, and my other friends said that I didn't have to. They would handle it. I told them that if anything else happened, though, I was no longer going to participate in this stuff. So downstairs we went again and started another EVP session. We did a couple and there were no responses, and inside I breathed a sigh of relief that that part of the evening was over and I could just walk away from all this with a strange story, and that was it. But on a fourth EVP session, a question was asked how I could help. And on playback, the female voice was there again, and it said, "Home." When my friends followed up with questions about where home was, the voice was there again and just said, "Genevieve, home." It was only about midnight at this point, and I was pretty much done with it. I knew none of my friends were playing a prank, but I was starting to get even more uncomfortable and just wanted to get out of there. It was at that point where I finally told my friend Matt, who had driven me there, not my boyfriend, just a good friend, that I wanted to go home and asked him if he would drive me back to my apartment. Everyone looked bummed out for a second, and I was angry with them that they thought this was all just really interesting shit, and not how it was affecting me. Brian and Jenny convinced me to stay for a little longer, but I wouldn't stay down in the jail cell area. Everyone seemed like they were trying to accommodate my feelings for a little bit there. Matt and I went back to the courtroom area and hung out for another hour or so with the guide after we told him what had happened on the return trip to the jail cell. When everyone else came back upstairs, they hadn't heard anything else from downstairs, and the guide asked if he could get copies of the EVPs for the place and its records. He also encouraged me to come back, but at that point I was just ready to go home. Some people stayed later, for the entire evening until 2, but Matt drove me home and it was about 1 in the morning. He came in to hang out for a little while to make sure that I was okay, and I really had calmed down by that time. A little after 2, my phone rang and I picked it up, and it was Jenny and my other friend Chrissy. They were saying that they had picked up more of the woman's voice saying something about being cold and wanting to get warm. I was all like, okay, thanks, I really needed to hear this, but I didn't say anything over the phone. I just said goodbye, hung up, and told Matt I was going to get ready for bed. I was tired. He took off and I did just that. I got ready for bed. I got into bed and was just going to watch some TV and fade away, when I heard a noise in my kitchen area. It was a loud tapping at my door. The main door to get into my apartment opened directly into the kitchen/living room area. At first I just thought it was the wind or something, so I just laid there and then turned the TV off. But then the tapping got louder and was actually a knock. For a second I thought maybe my landlord had come over, but he would have called beforehand. He never just showed up for anything. I got out of bed and went to the door after walking down the hallway, but there was no one at the door. I did open it up and looked around the front of my building, but no one was there. I shut the door and went back to my bedroom and lied down to try to fall asleep. And that's when I heard footsteps walking around in my kitchen. It was a linoleum floor, and the sound I was hearing were distinctly footsteps with someone who sounded like they had heavy shoes on. Now I was freaked out. I picked up my phone and immediately called Jenny. She didn't answer, and I sat there not knowing what to do. I called out, "Who's there?" but no one answered. I thought to myself, oh my God, this is silly. There's no one in my apartment. And I got out of bed and turned on the lights and went down the hallway back to the kitchen. There was no one there, obviously, and I started getting angry at myself at the situation. Was I just imagining this stuff because I was weirded out from going on that ghost hunt? As I stood there, my refrigerator door opened, right in front of my eyes. Then it closed. I stood staring at it, now thrown into a state of shock. Was I going crazy, or did I really just see that? Before I could even answer that question, my kitchen faucet turned on, the hot water. I mean, steaming. Again, I stood there not knowing what to do. I was terrified. The steam started to run up the window above the sink, and because it was fall, the windows were cold. It didn't take long for a lot of steam to cover the window. I couldn't even muster anything together to go over and turn the water off, and when I finally did, coming out of my fear, now feeling angry, I walked over, turned off the faucet, and at that moment I looked at the window. In the steam, an invisible hand or finger had written the words Genevieve and warm. Genevieve is not an easy word to spell even for me, but there it was on my window. That was it. I ran back to my room and called Jenny over and over until she finally sleepily answered. I told her what was going on, and at first she didn't believe me and thought I was just trying to keep the creepiness of the night going. But by now I was in tears and said, "I don't know what to do. You need to help me." She said she would come right over and for me to stay in my room. I hung up and waited for her, now very scared once again. My apartment was dead silent, pardon the term, until I heard the footsteps walking around in the kitchen again. Then they stopped. I strained to listen, but swear I heard footsteps on my carpeting coming down my hall to my room. My door was halfway open, and as I watched it, the door flew all the way open and crashed on the wall behind it. That was it. I got up, grabbed a pack of my smokes and a sweatshirt, and ran through my house to go sit on the porch to wait for Jenny. I waited for about 15 minutes, and she pulled up in her car and started walking up the front walk to my apartment. I should say that I just live in a unit of an old house with 3 other units in it. There's 2 at the front and 1 in the back. Jenny called out, "Hey, are you okay?" as she walked towards me, but then stopped, staring over my shoulder. I asked her if she was okay, and then slowly turned around to see all of the lights in my living room and kitchen flicking on and off. That's when we heard a scream from inside. A woman's scream. I jumped up and ran down into Jenny's arms in tears. Jenny took out her cell phone and called the police, as what we heard sounded like a human being inside my apartment. My neighbors weren't home in the front or the back, so they hadn't been bothered by any of this. The police came out in about 5 minutes, and I told them that we had just watched my lights flicking on and off as I sat on the porch, and we heard a woman scream from inside. I didn't go into all the details of earlier in the night, but I did tell them that someone had been knocking at my door and no one was there. The officer asked to go inside, and I said absolutely, and he said to wait on the porch. He went through my entire apartment, opened all the doors, checked in the backyard, looked in the bathroom, and even opened up cupboards and cabinets. There was no one in my apartment. He came back and reported as such and said that if anything else happened, to please call back. I told him I was going to Jenny's. We had decided that while he was looking through the apartment. He said he'd wait there while I ran in to get some things, made sure I locked both the back and front doors, and then reminded me to call again if anything else happened. I didn't want to do anything. I just wanted to get the hell out of there. We went back to Jenny's and collapsed in her living room and fell asleep after talking about what had happened. The next morning we went out for breakfast and then back to my apartment, and that's when I knew something was very wrong. All of my living room furniture had been moved to the center of the room. Everything. Couch, chairs, love seat, tables, entertainment center, all of it. We stood there, just looking at it when we opened the door. I then went down into my bedroom and saw that my bed had been basically picked up and propped against the wall. All of my clothes had been strewn about, and it was just a giant mess. In the bathroom, all of my stuff had been opened and either poured or squirted or smeared all over. Makeup, shampoo and conditioner, soap, all of it just this giant mess on my sink, counter, bathtub, toilet, everywhere. Jenny said we needed to call the cops again, so I did, and we waited on the porch for 2 other officers to show up. I told one what had happened the night before. He verified it, and both of them went into my apartment to look around. I assured them that I had locked the doors and that no one had been in my apartment for the rest of the night. They asked me to walk around to see if anything had been stolen, but nothing had. All of my stuff was still there. Even some of my more expensive jewelry and a cash box that I had underneath my bed hadn't been opened or touched. This wasn't a burglary. And one of the officers asked if I had any enemies or maybe some crazy friends who were just trying to play a prank. No one else had keys to my apartment other than my landlord and my parents, who lived about 20 miles away. Another officer showed up, and while they were asking me questions and taking notes, he wandered into the apartment and then came back out and asked the other officers to step to the side. He said something to them that I couldn't really hear, so I leaned over to listen to their conversation. He mentioned that in all the mess in my bathroom, there was no evidence of any fingerprints or really any fingers at all in the mess. In the smears, nothing. It was just a giant mess, as if someone had worn gloves, but even those didn't show any actual traces of fingers. He couldn't explain it. I called my landlord, and he came out and talked to the police and then talked to me. I'd been living there for 2 years, and I was on very good terms with him, and he said that he would change the locks that day. Because nothing had been stolen and nothing had really been ruined, the police said they would just file their report and again asked me to call back if anything else happened. I went in to clean things up, and Jenny helped me rearrange my furniture. I took a shower after the bathroom was cleaned up, and Jenny was sitting in my living room and said that she had just called the place that we were the night before. They had never heard of anything like this happening before, but they said they knew some people that could help if I wanted some. I didn't give a shit at this point. I just wanted whatever was happening in my apartment to stop. I didn't ask for this. Didn't want anything to come home with me, which actually looked like is exactly what happened. I just wanted it to stop. The woman we spoke to said she was going to make a couple of calls and got my number. She said someone would be calling me for help. We went out to lunch and came back, and there was an answering message on my machine. It was a very cheerful-sounding woman who asked me to call her back right away. I did, with Jenny sitting there, and answered a bunch of her questions about what had happened the night before, and then all of the things going on in my apartment. The woman offered to come over and say some sacred prayers and burn some sage to try to cleanse my apartment. I was ready to try anything. I certainly didn't want the same kind of shit happening over and over again that I already had. The woman said she'd be over shortly, and we went out onto the porch to enjoy the sunshine on a pretty pleasant fall day. When the woman pulled up in her car, I was half expecting some crazy witch with long hair and all that stuff. But she actually looked like a high-powered real estate person. You know, the kind you see on billboards. She was strikingly beautiful, and I told her so when she got near us. She smiled and asked me exactly what was I thinking. Was I expecting the Wicked Witch of the West? She entered the home and immediately stopped and kind of stared at my living room and kitchen. Then she asked if she could look at the rest of my apartment, and I said yes. She walked down the hall and again stopped at my bedroom with a strange look on her face. Then she came back and said, "I don't think this is going to be a problem. All of this happened because you left." I didn't ask her for the details on what she just meant. I figured she'd let me know later. Then she asked for me and Jenny to sit in the living room while she prayed and asked for us to jump in on the prayers when she prompted us. She just said that we needed to repeat after her when she needed us to. After about a half hour of these prayers, she got up with a bundle of sage and lit it on fire and then kind of tamped it out, and then began walking through my apartment, smudging it. I can't say I loved the smell of burning sage, but I didn't care. I was just hoping that all of this stuff was going to work. The woman went through the entire apartment and came back into the living room to say a few more prayers. She let off a sigh when all of it was done, and then kind of looked like she was spacing out. Then she closed her eyes, said another prayer on her own, and I don't know how else to say it, but everything seemed lighter all of a sudden. It's like there was a heaviness there that I hadn't even realized, but now that it was gone, I realized something had been there. She asked us to go out on the porch again, back into the sunlight, and then she began to say what had happened is that somehow I attracted something from the place that we had been the night before unknowingly. I had brought it home with me, again, unknowingly. She said it was the spirit of a young woman who was looking for help to get to the other side. She saw something in me that she thought was help, but was just confused. The woman also said that when I left, the woman's spirit became even more confused, and that's why all of the stuff in my apartment had been messed about with. She said after the prayers she felt the presence leave, and said that it would not come back. Still kind of skeptical, I thanked her for her time and how much money she needed, and she just smiled and gave me a hug and said these sorts of things have no monetary value. She gave me her number again and said to call if I needed anything. Jenny immediately offered to stay at my apartment that night with me, and we left to get some things for dinner and a couple bottles of wine. I was still on edge and worried about things. But that was unnecessary worry. Nothing happened again. I lived in that apartment for another 1.5 years before moving out with my boyfriend. There wasn't one funny sound, not one misplaced item, nothing. So here I am writing this, and nothing strange has ever happened in my life since then. But I have changed my mind about what I do and don't understand about this world and any other world outside of it. I have a healthy skepticism still, but I also have a healthy respect for things I don't understand. And I have a small part of me that believes there is an afterlife, and for whatever reason I was chosen to play a role in it that fateful night I went on a ghost hunt. The other thought that I have right now, and still have had since that day all this happened, is that whatever presence was in my apartment or stuck in that building has moved on and found peace someplace else. I truly hope that's what happened, and there is a happy ending for whatever or whoever that presence was. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like to hear narrated on my podcast and channel, email it to unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. Thanks for your patience over the last month or so. As many of you know, my channel was hacked, and dealing with YouTube and Google was quite an experience. If you ever have any issues with YouTube, the fastest way you're going to get a hold of them is on their Twitter account. That's exactly what I had to do, and their team was awesome in getting things back up and running for me. Also of note, I was spending a lot of time narrating a book for Audible that I'll be able to talk about a little bit down the line here. Nothing of a scary nature, but of a very important subject that I think a lot of people will be really interested in. So more to come on that. Thanks again for listening. If you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel, hit the little notification bell for every time that I upload. Much more coming soon. You can also follow me on social media. All the links to that are in the description below. And of course, if you'd like to step it up and support the channel, I also am on Patreon. A link to that is also in the description below. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.